Thousands of years ago, before countries, maps, or even the idea of civilization existed, humans lived at the mercy of nature. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. Sunrise meant work, sunset meant fear. Storms, floods, and droughts ruled their lives. In this uncertain world, two powerful rivers flowed through a vast dry land, the Tigris and the Euphrates. While the surrounding soil was harsh and lifeless, these rivers brought fertility. Crops grew, water flowed, and people were drawn back again and again. At first, humans came only temporarily. They hunted, drank water, and left. But slowly, they realized this land was different. Life could survive here. One day, someone made a decision to stay. That single choice changed human history forever. Homes were built along the riverbanks. Made of mud, wood, and reeds, the first settlements appeared. Fires burned at night, stories were shared, fear slowly faded, and cooperation grew. Humans learned that survival was possible together. This land between the two rivers was called Mesopotamia, meaning the land between rivers. No one knew then that this place would become the birthplace of civilization. Writing, law, cities, and states would all emerge from here. Mesopotamia did not yet know kings, wars, or laws. But it was preparing. Quietly, slowly. History was taking its first breath beside the rivers. This was the beginning. This was the first step of human civilization. The people of Mesopotamia slowly realized something important. The rivers did not only give life, they also tested it. The Tigris and Euphrates could be calm one moment and destructive the next. Sudden floods destroyed homes and crops. At other times, the rivers dried up, cracking the land. People began to ask questions. Why do the rivers behave like this? Can we control them? From these questions came humanity's first great struggle, the attempt to control nature. People worked together. Some dug the soil, others built embankments, while canals were carved to carry river water to distant fields. Walls of earth were raised to block floods. For the first time, humans were not fighting nature blindly, they were learning to survive with intelligence. This work could not be done alone. Cooperation became necessary. Questions arose. Who works when? Who gets water first? Who owns the land? These problems gave birth to something new, leadership. Some individuals began making decisions. Build the dam now. Release the water today. People followed them because survival depended on these choices. Small riverside settlements began to grow. Humans were no longer just hunters. They became farmers. Wheat, barley, and dates were cultivated. Surplus food was stored, and where surplus existed, power followed. Without realizing it, the people of Mesopotamia were not just growing crops. They were planting the seeds of cities, laws, and kingdoms. The rivers taught them a lesson. Life is not easy, but with wisdom, survival is possible. The small settlements along the rivers began to change. Over time, populations grew. Places that once had only a few mud houses now echoed with activity, rows of homes, open markets, and constant movement. People began to realize, if everyone farms, who will do the other work? From this question emerged a new way of life. Some became potters, shaping clay into jars and bowls. Others worked metal, creating tools and weapons. Some wove cloth, others built boats. Humans no longer worked only to survive. They began dreaming of living better. Food was exchanged for goods in a system known as barter. Villages connected with each other, trade routes formed, and boats carried products across rivers. Among these villages, some grew stronger than others due to fertile land, water access, and skilled people. These places slowly transformed into cities. At the center of each city stood a large temple. People believed the gods lived there. But the temple was more than a religious place. It was a storage center, a decision-making hub, and a symbol of power. Walls were built around cities for protection. Where wealth existed, danger followed. Outsiders, rival groups, and neighboring cities all desired these resources. Thus emerged some of the world's first cities, Uruk, Uar, and Lagash. These names were no longer just locations, they became identities. Moving from village to city meant new rules, discipline, and dreams. But it also gave rise to conflict, power struggles, and social divisions. Mesopotamia was no longer just the birthplace of civilization, it had become a living laboratory of human society. Cities were growing, populations increasing, and wealth accumulating. But a serious problem emerged. Memory was no longer enough. Who stored how much grain? Who owed what to whom? What was inside the temple storerooms? Oral memory failed. Mistakes happened. Conflicts grew. Trust began to break. Then the people of Mesopotamia did something extraordinary. They captured words. At first, it was simple. On small clay tablets, they drew symbols. A line meant a bag of grain. A circle meant a sheep. These images were used for accounting, not storytelling. Over time, the symbols evolved. Pictures became simpler, more abstract, and slowly transformed into a system of signs. This writing system became known as cuneiform. Cuneiform means wedge-shaped. Using a sharp reed, marks were pressed into wet clay. Once dried, the tablets preserved the words for thousands of years. Writing was no longer limited to accounting. People wrote prayers, laws, contracts, and even personal complaints. Some wrote, "Return my land." Others recorded debts. With writing came the rise of a scribal class. Scribes were among the most educated individuals. Not everyone could write, and literacy meant access to power. For the first time, humans defeated time itself. Spoken words vanished, but words carved into clay survived millennia. These small clay tablets of Mesopotamia became one of the most powerful tools in human history. As cities grew, so did conflicts. Humans were no longer fighting only hunger or nature, they were fighting each other. Disputes over land, water rights, debts, and theft became common. In small communities, elders settled issues. But in large cities, whose word would be final? From this problem emerged a powerful and necessary idea. In early Mesopotamia, laws were spoken. But spoken laws could change or be forgotten. Writing laws on clay tablets meant permanence. The law declared, stealing would be punished. Debts must be repaid. Damage required compensation. But the law was not equal for all. Society was divided, rich and poor, free citizens and slaves. Punishments depended on status. The most famous set of laws was the Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone. It proclaimed, an eye for an eye. Justice was harsh but clear. Through law, kings strengthened their authority. They claimed the laws were given by the gods, and the king merely enforced them. This made the king the bridge between gods and people. Law brought order but took away freedom. It created fear, yet also safety. For the first time, humanity realized justice and power are not always the same. After laws were created, people believed order was achieved. But laws required force to be enforced. That force became centered in one figure, the king. Mesopotamian kings were not just rulers, they were believed to be chosen by the gods. To question the king was to question divine will. Kings built massive temples called ziggurats, step-like towers reaching toward the sky. These were seen as bridges between gods and humans. Temples symbolized power as much as faith. Within temples were stored food, wealth, and written laws. Priests supported the king, and in return, the king empowered the priests. Religion and politics became inseparable. But power did not bring peace. Kings began to desire the resources of other cities, water, land, and trade routes. War became inevitable. Organized armies emerged for the first time. Weapons were forged, soldiers trained. Warfare and governance marched side by side. From these conflicts arose empires. One city conquered another. Kings' names echoed across distant lands. Mesopotamia was no longer just the cradle of civilization, it had become a bloody stage of power. When wars begin, history records the names of kings, but ordinary people pay the true price. Mesopotamian cities stood against one another. The reasons changed, but the blood remained the same. Days began with prayers and ended with war calls. Young men were taken into armies. Weapons in their hands, fear in their eyes. War was not just fought on battlefields. Crops burned, homes collapsed, families were torn apart. Victorious cities looted the defeated, taking food, wealth, and even people as slaves. These slaves built palaces, temples, and city walls. Behind the beauty of civilization lay countless tears and blood. Kings called victory the blessing of the gods. War stories were carved into stone. But the stones never recorded how many children were orphaned or how many mothers lost sons. Yet humanity learned from war. Stronger weapons were forged, strategies refined, and rule became harsher. War destroyed civilizations and reshaped them. Mesopotamian history left a haunting question. Is victory truly glory, or merely the silence after human suffering? After wars ended, cities rebuilt. But not everyone rose equally. Between victor and defeated, an invisible chain formed: slavery. In Mesopotamia, to be a slave meant becoming property. Prisoners of war, debtors, and sometimes even children were enslaved. Life no longer belonged to oneself. Slaves worked in fields, temples, and palaces. Labor began before sunrise and ended after sunset. Their voices were silent. Decisions belonged to others. Slavery created a rigid social hierarchy. At the top stood kings and priests, followed by soldiers and wealthy merchants, then farmers and craftsmen. At the bottom, law reinforced this division. A slave's suffering was worth less than a free person's. Punishments varied based on status. Justice depended on identity. Yet slaves were human. They laughed, cried, and dreamed. History forgot their names, but their hands built the foundations of civilization. Mesopotamia teaches us, the higher a civilization rises, the darker its shadow becomes. Mesopotamia was fertile, but it was not complete. It had grain, clay, and rivers, but lacked wood, stone, and precious metals. People realized, strength cannot come from isolation. From this realization emerged trade. Boats traveled along rivers. Goods from Uruk and Uar reached distant lands. In exchange for grain, textiles, and crafted items, Mesopotamia received wood, copper, silver, and precious stones like lapis lazuli. Trade did more than exchange goods, it exchanged people. Languages, clothing, beliefs, and stories flowed into Mesopotamian cities. These cities became gateways to the wider world. Trade routes were dangerous. Bandits, storms, and wars threatened merchants. They traveled in groups, wrote contracts, and prayed to the gods. Gradually, merchants gained power. Alongside kings and priests arose a new elite, whose strength lay not in weapons but in wealth. Through trade, Mesopotamia not only received, it gave. Writing, law, and accounting systems spread far beyond its borders. Born between rivers, this civilization had begun to speak to the world. After humans learned to control rivers, build cities, fight wars, and trade, one question remained unanswered. Who truly controls everything? Why do floods happen? Why does drought strike? Why does disease spread? The people of Mesopotamia looked to the sky. They believed the world was governed by unseen forces, powers that could be angry, pleased, and decisive over human fate. Thus emerged countless gods. Every river, city, and activity had its own deity, gods of war, goddesses of love, gods of harvest. These gods were human-like, angry, jealous, and power-hungry. People believed disaster would follow if the gods were not appeased. Sacrifices were offered in temples. Prayers continued day and night. Priests claimed to understand divine will, turning fear into obedience. Astronomy was born from belief. People observed the skies, tracked stars and planets, believing the heavens spoke the language of the gods. But belief brought not only comfort, it brought control. Kings claimed divine support. War, law, and rule became sacred acts. Mesopotamia taught humanity a powerful lesson. Fear gives birth to belief, and belief gives birth to power. Amid war, gods, and power, the people of Mesopotamia paused to ask, what remains when a human dies? From this question emerged stories, not ordinary tales, but epics. The most famous was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was part human, part god, powerful, proud and unstoppable. Yet he feared one thing, death. When his closest friend Enkidu died, Gilgamesh was shattered. For the first time, the king realized power could not grant immortality. He journeyed through unknown lands, forests, mountains, and dark seas, seeking eternal life. He wanted to know if humans could live forever. In the end, Gilgamesh learned immortality does not belong to the body, but to deeds. Humans live on through memory and story. This epic was not just entertainment, it was a mirror. People saw their fears, hopes, and limits reflected in it. Mesopotamia became the first civilization to tell humanity, "You are not a god, but your story can make you eternal." When humans built cities, waged wars, and merged law with gods to control power, it seemed everything was stable. Yet nature, humans, and fate can rise together against civilization. The Tigris and Euphrates sometimes flooded, destroying crops. Sometimes drought or storm struck, beyond human control. No wall, however tall, could hide human vulnerability. Intrigues brewed among kings. Even powerful armies were not always safe. When a king died, power vacuums led to theft, rebellion, and chaos. Trade faltered. Distant lands closed routes. Food, wealth, and resources dwindled. Ordinary people starved. Famine claimed lives. The result: cities emptied one by one. Shame, fear, and distrust cast the shadow of Mesopotamia's decline. Decline taught one lesson: power is temporary. Civilization cannot rely solely on strength. Humans, rivers, and the heavens together write history. Mesopotamia showed that humanity can rise strong, but everything has its limits. Mesopotamia eventually fell. Cities crumbled. Kings and gods' names faded. Yet the core lessons of civilization did not vanish. Writing, law, city planning, agriculture, trade, these all passed to the next generations. New cities studied clay tablets and learned cuneiform. They understood rivers must be controlled, humans kept in order, fear and belief harnessed. Law, warfare, and trade, humans had learned it all. Each generation knew power is temporary, but knowledge is lasting. These lessons spread beyond Mesopotamia, to Phoenicia, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Mesopotamian people learned to face death, but they showed how life can become immortal through stories, laws, writing, and learning. The civilization of the river ended, but its teachings, its stories, its achievements, remain the foundation of human knowledge. Mesopotamia is not just a place. It is the first school of human civilization. The people of Mesopotamia did not just build cities, laws, or trade. They invented technology, giving civilization a new dimension. One of the greatest inventions was the wheel. Initially small, used on carts to carry heavy soil or goods, it gradually transformed life, facilitating transport, trade, and even war. Metals became more common: copper, bronze, and eventually iron. Tools and weapons improved, farming became easier, defense stronger, and crafts more advanced. Mesopotamians also learned mathematics and astronomy. They tracked stars, calculated trade accounts, and determined crop cycles. This knowledge later formed the foundation for calendars and timekeeping. Their technology did more than make life easier. It taught humans to understand nature, solve problems, and think ahead. Mesopotamia's inventions still touch our lives today. Wheels, metals, mathematics, and knowledge of the skies all began in their hands. When humans learned to survive, they began to seek beauty. The people of Mesopotamia created not only for function, but for emotion. They carved not only writing into clay, but sculptures, gods, kings, warriors, shaped from stone and earth. The wide-eyed statues seemed to gaze toward the sky, filled with fear and faith. Temple walls were decorated with stories, battles, divine glory, royal victories. Art was not decoration alone, it was a language of power. Jewelry made from gold, silver, and precious stones signified not just beauty, but status and strength. Music was part of daily life. Drums, flutes, stringed instruments played during festivals, rituals, and even mourning. This art reveals that Mesopotamians were not just civilized, they were emotional beings. They feared, loved, and expressed those feelings through art. Through clay and stone, they whispered to the future. We felt, we dreamed. Behind the stories of kings, wars, and gods existed another history, the history inside the home. Mesopotamian society was built upon families, and at the heart of the families stood women. Women managed households, raised children, and prepared food. Yet they were not only homemakers. Many worked in temples, ran businesses, and even owned property. Women's rights under law were limited, but their presence was strong. Marriage was a social contract with defined roles for both men and women. Family was a place of security. Elderly parents and children lived together. To lose family meant to lose social protection. Daughters learned from mothers, sons from fathers. Skills, knowledge, and culture passed from generation to generation. Mesopotamia shows us that civilization is not built only in palaces. It is built beside the fire in the kitchen. After the invention of writing, a new question arose. Who will teach this knowledge? In Mesopotamia emerged institutions similar to the world's first schools, called Iduba, meaning house of tablets. These were for training future scribes, not the general population. School life was harsh. Young students wrote on clay tablets from morning to evening. Mistakes were punished. Education was more duty than joy. Students learned writing, mathematics, accounting, law, and religious texts. To become a scribe meant status, employment, and security. Teachers were strict yet highly respected. They believed mistakes led to disorder, and disorder meant the fall of civilization. This education system did more than create skilled workers. It taught discipline, order, and the value of memory. Mesopotamian schools prove that civilization survives through the pens of the young. Life in Mesopotamia was uncertain. Sudden illness, fever, and epidemics constantly reminded people how fragile life was. They believed diseases were caused by gods or evil spirits. Thus, healing had two sides, medicine and prayer. Doctors used herbs, oils, honey, and minerals, while priests recited incantations to drive away spirits. A doctor's mistake was not just failure, it could mean legal punishment. Hammurabi's code stated that if a patient died due to wrong treatment, the doctor would be punished. Death was frightening yet accepted. People believed the soul went to a dark underworld, a shadowy existence without joy. This fear taught people to cling to life. Every day and every breath was considered a gift from the gods. Mesopotamian medicine shows us that science was born standing between fear and belief. Mesopotamians feared death, but they did not dream of heaven. They believed everyone went to a dark world after death. This world was called Kor or Irkalla, a shadowy underworld where kings and beggars were equal. There was no light. Souls ate dust and lived like shadows. No joy, no judgment, only existence. This belief kept people attached to life. Good deeds did not promise heaven but earned honor in life. Food and water were offered to the dead, believing neglected spirits would bring suffering to the living. The underworld was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, harsh and without mercy. Mesopotamian views on death teach us that instead of hoping for heaven, they learned to value life itself. All Mesopotamian stories come together in one tale, the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was the king of Uruk, half god, half human. Gilgamesh was powerful but arrogant. To challenge him, the gods created a wild man, Enkidu. They began as enemies, but became inseparable friends. Enkidu's death shattered Gilgamesh. For the first time, a king asked, "Will I die? Is human life so fragile?" In search of immortality, Gilgamesh crossed unknown lands, gods, monsters, and seas. At the end, he learned a painful truth. Immortality is not meant for humans. He returned to Uruk wiser. He realized that humans live on through their deeds, cities, and stories. Mesopotamia lived the same way. Kingdoms fell, gods faded, cities turned to dust. But stories survived. The story proves civilizations never truly die as long as they are remembered. Here ends the story of Mesopotamia.